inter-school English debate. After a long and grueling battle, 4 schools have made it to the final round, and they are St. George's College, Mussoorie, St. Joseph's Academy, Dehradun, Tyndale Biscoe School, and the Oasis School. So congratulations all 4 schools, and I request the audience to give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Before I invite the first 2 schools, competing schools, I would like to extend a very heartfelt and warm welcome to our 3 judges for this debate. They are Mr. Vishal Gupta, Reverend Lazarus Cornelius, and Mrs. Sushma Cornelius. Mr. Gupta completed his Legum Baccalaureus and was called to the bar in 1999. After gaining extensive experience in litigation, he cleared the prestigious Advocate on Record examination of the Supreme Court of India 2006. Before setting up his independent counsel practice in 2010, he worked with a top-tier law firm and in the chambers of a distinguished senior counsel. With vast experience in constitutional and administrative laws, electricity, environment, insolvency laws, and mining, competition, intellectual laws, as well as international and domestic arbitration, his core areas of practice are real estate and infrastructure, insolvency laws and electricity, and natural resources, including allied laws like environment and forests. He's a member of the Bar Council of Uttar Pradesh, a member of the Supreme Court Bar Association, and a member of the Supreme Court Advocate on Record. Mr. Gupta runs his own law firm in Delhi called Castus Legal. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time from your busy schedule to be with us today. Mrs. Sushma Cornelius is presently working with CMC Vellore and Uttarakhand Health Network in their distance education program as a trainer coordinator for their CLHDC and CHPC programs for churches, pastors, lay leaders, missionaries, and Bible college students. She was previously with World Vision for 26 years and worked in various capacities as program manager, operations manager, director of the HIV/AIDS project, PMO director, and also the director for the Global Health TB program across 70 districts in 8 states of India. She has been very involved in the church, coordinating the women's and children's ministries, as well as in social action and training and developing women from the lower sections of society. Mrs. Cornelius has always been by our side whenever we have needed her, whether it has been to grace an event by consenting to be the chief guest or to share her expertise and experience with us when adjudicating an event. Her ever-smiling countenance and positivity never fail to uplift our spirits. We are so blessed to have you as a member of the Wynberg-Allen family, ma'am. We cannot thank you enough for agreeing to judge this competition. Reverend Lazarus Cornelius is presently the pastor of Union Church, Mussoorie, and supervising the Hebron School, which is an outreach ministry of Union Church. He studied at Wynberg-Allen and Woodstock School and played hockey and cricket for his school teams. After finishing school in 1987, he pursued theological studies in Canada. He returned to India in 1985 and worked with various churches like the Church of North India as youth director for the Synod, with the Lutheran Church as the coordinator for ministry with students from Africa. While working, he also did his master's in theology with Wales University. Prior to coming to Mussoorie, he was the regional manager for North India, Pakistan, and the Middle East with Human Dynamic Asia Pacific for 7 years, working in the corporate sector as an EAP and lifestyle coach and trainer. He is keenly interested in photography, biking, music, and cooking. Reverend Lazarus Cornelius is a greatly respected and loved member of the Wynberg-Allen family who takes care of the spiritual well-being of the students and staff. He's a pillar of support for us. Along with shouldering countless responsibilities, he manages to find the time to judge elocution contests, dramatics competitions, and other literary events. We are deeply indebted to you, sir. I shall... Yes. So, for this final round, we will be conducting it in two phases. First, St. George's College, who will represent side proposition, will be pitted against St. Joseph's Academy, who will represent side opposition. So I invite the members of St. George's College and St. Joseph's Academy to please take their places on stage. Thank you. Now, the topic that all four schools will be debating today is, this house believes that public services are best run by private companies. The format for this debate would be the modified Cambridge format, which means that all three speakers from St. George's College will represent side propositions. So they would be speaking in support of the motion, while all three speakers from St. Joseph's Academy, who would represent side opposition, would be speaking against the topic. The order in which these speakers will be speaking would be, first, I would invite the first speaker, or the Prime Minister of St. George's College, to express his views in favor of the motion. I would then request the Leader of the Opposition from St. Joseph's Academy to present his views, to also counter the arguments of the other side. We would then request the Deputy Prime Minister of side proposition, followed by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, to express their views. While they are doing so, they can also counter the arguments of the other side. Last of all would be the Chief Whip of side proposition, followed by the Chief Whip of side opposition. And what all speakers should keep in mind is that they do need to accept one point of information, which means that the other side would put before you one question which you would have to accept. The first minute and the third minute are protected minutes, which means nobody can question you during that time. In the second minute, your opponents will be permitted to question you. May I remind you that you must ask your question in 20 seconds, and when responding to a question, you should not take more than 45 seconds. After the POI, or the point of information, has been dealt with, we will continue with the rest of your debate. So before we begin, do any of the speakers have any doubts or questions? Right, that's perfect. And yes. Yes. We will be ringing a bell when the second minute starts. So you will know that the second minute has started, and that is time to either ask a point of information or respond to it. When the second minute ends, we will ring the bell again. 30 seconds prior to the conclusion of your time, which is the third minute, we will again ring the bell, so we will warn you that your time is about to end, and then a final bell. Yes. We will pause the stopwatch, so do not worry about that. So when you're responding to a POI, it will not take away from the whole time of your debate. We will pause the stopwatch. So do not worry about that. But you are advised not to overshoot the time limit of 3 minutes, because you are liable to be penalized for it. You you must avoid reading, and reference cards is permitted. So for the benefit of the judges, the criteria for marking the speakers is content 15 marks, argument 10 marks, fluency, style and appropriateness of language 5 marks, delivery 10 marks, rebuttal 10 marks, and when you consider rebuttal, we request you to consider the manner in which a speaker responds to the point of information. So without further ado, I will request the Prime Minister of St. George's College, who represents Site Proposition, Parth Jindal, to come and present his arguments.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. A very good afternoon to the House at large. The motion on the floor of this House states that this House believes that public services are best run by the private sector. My name is Parth Jindal and I'll be the Prime Minister of Side Proposition in today's debate. Now first of all, before I go down to my constructives and my logic, let me first give you the 3 issues that we are handling in today's debate and the issues that will be brought up by Side Opposition today. The first one being accountability. Second one being the monopolization that will happen. And third, how we will have high prices if we are run by the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, today all of this can be countered by a very, very simple statement. That is, how if all of these companies, we're not saying that they have the absolute control over these public services. What we are saying is that they will be accountable to the government in the end, but they will be the ones who are running it. Running something does not mean having absolute control. I hope that is very, very clear. Now, the stakeholders in today's debate are first, the society, obviously, second, the private sector, and third, the government. Now, before we move on, it's very important to define public services. All public services are essential in the form of electricity, water, transport, and etc. With that everything clear, I'll go down to my first constructive, that is the division of work. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that... Sorry, so I'll take that after a few seconds. We all know that when the government is responsible for a lot of jobs in our country. Today we know that they are responsible for railways, they are responsible for so many other things. But today what we are saying, when we are giving private sector the responsibility to run these public services, what we will have is a better, efficient division of work, and that's how we'll maintain efficiency. Yes, or POI first.
So Speaker, you expect these companies to be absolute paragons of virtue who will completely do this work without any private personal profit motive. So, but history bears testament to the fact that private companies have always focused more on profit rather than the actual work. So how do you justify them not doing that?
Thank you so much for that question. That's actually a second constructive, how the profit motive that these companies have will be actually beneficial for the public service, for the public, and obviously for the private company. That will be a second constructive, and that will be explained by my second speaker. I'll continue with my first one, that is division of work. Today, when we are giving responsibility to these private sectors to to do these public services, what they'll do, they have a better, efficient system. We all know of the divisional structure that these companies follow. The government is responsible for so many other things. It's very hard to operate all these things at once. But when these private companies, with their profit motive, if they run these companies, if they run these public services, what we'll see? We'll see better quality. Better quality of work, people will be happy. And all these benefits that we'll be receiving cannot happen in the world where side opposition exists. That is a world where the government is running all these public services. Public services, when we talk about, should always be run by these private companies, because when this happens, like I said, we'll have a more efficient system. And lastly, when we have this, there's a better management. Today private companies focus a lot on management skills. Whereas the government, it's not at all efficient when we talk about so many other things. We're not blaming the government for not doing its job, but what we are saying that they have a lot at their hand, they have a lot on their plate. What we should do is lessen their burden by giving it to the private companies. Thank you so much.
Now request
side proposition today, esteemed House members, attempts to sell you this absolute utopia where private companies have absolutely no profit motive, complete accountability, and are willing to cooperate with the government in every single sense of the word. As the opposition, however, it is our duty to dispel that notion, and as the leader of the opposition, I would firstly do that by establishing the basic point of contention between the two sides in this debate. We, inside opposition, do not set the government up on a pedestal. We do not ask it. We do not consider it perfect. We don't consider it incapable of making mistakes. But what we say today is that it would be a grave mistake to hand the working of the public sector, the entire public sector, which the opposition tends to do, into the hands of these private companies. Because what these companies have shown us time and again is, one, they lack accountability, two, they lack integrity, and thirdly, they are not driven by the motive of serving the public, rather filling their own pockets. And that precisely is what we must avoid today in the 21st century. Because if we have learned something from the past, it is that governments must place the public first. Now, how the private sector handling these public services would be worse would be, first, the profit motive. These companies, they operate... I'll just come to that. These companies, they operate with a capitalistic viewpoint. Therefore, they absolutely commodify individuals into nothing but money-making machines for them. Yes, sir.
So, you very clearly say that these companies will have no profit motive. But like we said, these public services are essentials that the public needs, as in water, electricity and transport. Meaning, even with a small margin of profit, they'll be turning over millions. Which private company in their right mind would not want that? Please comment.
Thank you, sir. I was just coming to that. So, as I just said, that these basic services that come under the public sector, well, the private sector, esteemed House members, that would completely commodify it. It would ignore the need individuals have for water, for basic services, and commodify to the extent that they're increasing these prices, they're hiking these prices, till even the common man can't afford it. And what that would lead to is just a degradation of the individual, simply for the profit fulfillment of these companies. Moreover, esteemed House members, when we go into the proposition's assertions of these different companies taking over these sectors, what we lose is the very concept of interdisciplinary development. Because when the government is operating these sectors, it has in control all the information, all the data, all the statistics required to continue its interdisciplinary programs that happen in collaboration with various programs, with various departments. That, however, all goes to waste when the private companies come in, because they refuse to collaborate with other sectors, they don't share the information with the government, even their lack of accountability plays in here, because they might even sell it to the highest bidder to third parties just for their personal profit. That precisely is why these companies cannot be trusted to run in the public sector. This would just lead to myopic monopoly, where these companies, even though they might be working under the government, the absolute hold they have over the resources, over the money, would give them an absolutely unearned increment. And that, esteemed House members, would be nothing but a dystopia. Because today, we aim for a world with interdisciplinary development, where government companies and government departments can come together regardless of their agendas and establish a progressive world for all citizens, regardless of the money they can put in the private company's pocket. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditya. I now request Uday Agarwal, the Deputy Prime Minister of St. George's College, to present his views.
A very good afternoon to the House at large. The motion on the floor of the House states, this House believes that public services are best run by the private sector. My name is Uday Agarwal. I'll be the second speaker side proposition for today's debate. Panel, my duty today is twofold. Firstly, to continue with my team's case, and second, to refute side opposition today. Panel, they come here and talk about how high prices are there and private sector running public services will promote high prices. We have one counter to that, which is the Price Regulation Board. High prices can be easily countered by the point of Price Regulation Board, which will be further explained by my third speaker. Now, coming to the continuation of my stand, let me talk about my first constructive today, which is reputation and image. Now, panel, private companies are bound to do better work because they have to preserve their image and their reputation as a trustworthy company. Their success as a company depends on their work and their hard work. Coming on to the second point, which is private funding. Now, private sector today, it is better for them to arrange funding than the government. There are three primary ways that the private sector can get funding. First one, equity shares, preference shares, and the third one, debentures. Now this might sound like an economics or commerce lecture, but this is very important to understand the depth of this motion. Government, on the other hand, has only one primary option, which is bonds. Now, panel, on the other hand, taxes collected are for all government activities, but this funding which will be collected will be only for the specific public service. Which brings me to my second consumptive, which is how there will be no pensions in the private sector, whereas pensions are there in the government. Now, instead of giving pensions, the private sector promotes this 401k scheme, the employee stock option plan, employee provident fund. Now, what are they? They are basically a scheme to plan a future for these employees. Now, what happens in this panel, if an employee is earning 1 lakh per annum, 10% of that salary will be taken out and collected so that money can be taken by the employee afterwards in their life. Let's also talk about how panel government salaries in today's era are very nominal. On the other hand, private sector, the life lived by private employees, they promote better standards of living, and how they also promote higher satisfaction of employees. Now, when we compare this with the satisfaction of the government employees, the satisfaction of private employees is much more. Now, panel, last point I would like to present today is how there is sense of comfort, how there is no sense of comfort and no sense of security in these private sectors. Therefore, promoting competition, and that competition is not in a negative sense, panel. That competition will be taken in a very positive sense, because that competition promotes development. That competition promotes a better sense of work in these private sectors. With this, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much. St. Joseph's Academy, I'd like to point out that not put forth a POI. So I urge you, when you get the opportunity, please do put forth a POI, because otherwise it definitely becomes an advantage for your opponent. You hear the first bell, that means you ask. After that, I mean, you need to be very quick, because if you aren't quick, then very soon it will be the bell is being rung at 1 minute, but now be ringing it. The second bell will ring at 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, because otherwise I think it's confusing the speakers, right? So at the end of 1 minute, we'll be ringing the bell, right? The opponents that they can ask you to do it. After that, we'll ring the bell at 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then a double bell to 10 minutes. Right? So do be quick to think of a question. Do not take too long. I now request, So I now request Ira Gayatri Jha, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, to express her views. Representing St. Joseph's Academy.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a country wherein 8 crore 70 lakh people are below the poverty line. And these people don't have enough for a proper meal. And today the esteemed side proposition talks about privatization of the most basic necessities like water, electricity and public transport, just for these private companies to go and build fancy hospitals and packaged water that forget about being accessed. It cannot even be thought of by the majority of these masses which are poor and struggling. A very good morning to this august house. Today I, Ira Gayatri Jha, am here to present my case in strong opposition of the motion. Ladies and gentlemen, profit maximization is the core idea and motive of these companies. Whereas in stark comparison, the government companies actually have social welfare as their core idea and ideology, because they are accountable to the people. Government is elected for the people, by the people, and any action that is against the welfare will subvert the very foundation of a constitutional democracy, which will lead people to question their motives. Ladies and gentlemen, further, these companies, when profit maximization is the core idea, exploitation of the masses comes as a mandatory consequence. In order to increase their profits, these companies... Please wait for a second. These companies have low cost of production, which in turn compromises in the quality, and when it comes to basic needs, that is something we just cannot afford. So I'll take your view.
Ma'am, in the agriculture sector, there's something called MSP, that is a minimum support price. A very simple construct can be set up in necessities as well, where the companies will have to sell it below a price ceiling. Please comment.
So see, you cannot just talk about one sector and in large talk about how private companies are actually best run by the government. Because sir, the truth is that when it comes to agriculture sector, then what about cases as in the telecom sector? Wherein it was the telecom countries, now that the government telecom companies have been sold, we are all now faced by a vision of private monopoly and duopoly in the name of Reliance Jio, which is now staring in the face of the Indian economy. Ladies and gentlemen, further, now the side proposition may talk about how there is this financial deficit in the government. But should we as sound members prioritize financial compulsions over the issues that prevail in the society that are necessary for the welfare and progress? Ladies and gentlemen, further talking about the sector, if arms, for example, manufacturing of arms, was given to these private companies, do you actually think that they would not tell confidential information for the right price? Because as already stated, they do not hold accountability to the public. Ladies and gentlemen, courts. Courts are also a part of public services. Do you believe that these private companies hold the impartiality and the unbiased opinion to pass justice in a country wherein so many cases happen on a daily basis? Ladies and gentlemen, we must emphasize on the point that social welfare is what is the need of the hour. And the government has been elected by the people to do so, so it is the right of the government to actually help the people and not the private companies, whose only idea in the end is profit maximization. Further, ladies and gentlemen, also talking about there is nothing preventing these companies from selling their stakes in a particular public service company to other multinational companies. And might I emphasize that these multinational companies actually have no reason to think about the public of a country. So in the end, I'd only like to say that it is imperative to note that private companies are only good. We are not undermining their importance. We're simply stating that when it comes to the welfare and progress of society, public companies and public government is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva. I now request Moksh Jain, Chief Whip of St. George's College, to cite proposition. What is arguments?
Profit motive, profit motive, profit motive. Good afternoon to us gathering. The topic on the floor of this house states that this house believes public services are best run by private sector, and I am strictly against for the motion. And as the chief whip, I have two duties to this house today. The first duty is to consolidate my team stand, and second is to refute any or all arguments given by side opposition today. Now, coming down to my first duty, our side very clearly stated to you three stakeholders. First, that is the public. Second, that are the private companies or the private sector, and third is the government itself. Now, along these lines, we provided you various constructives which were consolidated into these three, right? Coming down to the private, we talked about the fact that the reputation of a company is based upon how their performance. So essentially, if the company does not perform well in its duties of a public service, that means that that company can very easily lose its reputation, hence also lose customers. Today, if private sector is in charge, they have no customer engagement as such. There is no wide base area that they are providing for engagement. They are providing for the entire nation, which essentially states that no, sir. Which essentially is basically saying that they can do whatever they want. They talk about monopoly engagement. My very first speaker very clearly talked about the fact that today, when we talk about monopolies, there has to be absolute control. But we already said that these companies will not have absolute control. In fact, a very large stake will be held by the government. Essentially, they will be on the board of directors. And so the points about multinational companies coming into the picture is actually not valid and hence cannot be taken into consideration. Yes, sir, your POI.
Sir, I'd like to ask you a POI.
So you talked about broadening services, and you actually are here selling this dream that you actually stand for the welfare of people. But let's take an example of a minerals industry, which is also a public services, of water industries and telecommunication. How do you think that private enterprises will actually be able to ever broaden the sectors for the welfare of the people with no control over state policies?
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, since you are so good at giving examples, let me give an example of my own. The government purchased an airline one time. I believe that every single person knows about it, and the fact is that it went under 5 years. Tata had to buy back that airline simply because the government wished for it to. This is when government cannot handle everything. We have to understand government are not superheroes. They're simply elected by the public. They have to do what is best for the public. Today, what we are saying, the best for the public is higher standard of living, whereas what you are saying, let it be stagnant. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take an example of India today. India has been developing for the last 50 years. Why is that so, ladies and gentlemen? Why is that India had gone into a financial deficit in 1991 where it could not even get foreign exchange? Why did such a thing happen? It was because of the fact that we did not trust the private sector enough. Today, the only thing that is required by the government is to put that trust into the private sector, to understand that private sectors are not filled with greedy monsters, ladies and gentlemen. These people also wish to do what is right. We have to understand that these people, while do want to make a profit, these necessities have to be sold at a minimum price, like my POI clearly stated. Now, coming down to some refutations, their side talked about basically two things. The first was that there will be no profits. The second, that since there is no profits, there is no incentive. That was very clearly tackled by one single POI that my side asked, which stated that, ladies and gentlemen, since necessities are required, today nobody can say that I will not drink water. That is not possible. Hence, they have to buy it, whether, even if the company is only earning 1 rupee or even 1 paisa on 1 bottle or 1 liter of water, that is actually turning into millions because of the fact that how much water is being consumed. And now you might say that the companies might raise their prices. That can very clearly be tackled by the fact that a price ceiling can be raised by the government, and that is very clearly legal because of the fact that these are necessities that have to be present in society today. We are not talking about luxuries here, ladies and gentlemen. We are not talking about we are not about providing Bugattis or providing one second, sorry. BMWs to these people. No, ladies and gentlemen, we are simply talking about water and electricity, and we have to understand that these are necessities which can very clearly be provided with price ceilings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raj. And I now invite the Chief Whip of Side Opposition, Anushri Muller.
May I start? Ladies and gentlemen, the motion has already fallen. Because I completely failed to comprehend as to how the sound members of the audience and the panel will ever buy the sugar-dripping, grandiloquent speech given by my opponents when they fail to understand. First, they will not agree to this with the major fear of excessive of excessive sugar leading to them to having diabetes. Secondly, to this ignorant dream sued by my opponents here for this vast audience staying in a country where, let me remind you, with a vast majority of as such of 80 crore as mentioned by my deputy, 80 crore people under the poverty line. Ladies and gentlemen, such ignorance can only be presented by my opponents. And ladies and gentlemen, if ignorance is bliss, then my opponents are definitely living in paradise. A very good afternoon to the August House. Today I, Anushri Batola, the Chief Whip, and I'm here to conclude the speech of my side and elaborate on the points already made by my team members. Ladies and gentlemen, in the premise of my debate, I'll first counter the point of accountability mentioned by the very first speaker of the proposition here. Ladies and gentlemen, the gaping hole which we cannot willfully ignore is that the private companies which have deals with governments behind closed doors who actually are not subject to the requests of freedom of information, ladies and gentlemen, under the garb of commercial confidentiality. Ladies and gentlemen, if we go by the dream presented to us by my dear opponents, in the vision, and as per their vision, there won't be a day sooner than maybe a year's time as such, where our data will be sold to the highest bidder. Yes, I'll take your POI.
Ma'am, like you mentioned that there are 80 crore people who are under the poverty line. Don't you think that if the government gives these public services to private companies, their taxes, their assets can be used for the upliftment of these people? Please comment.
Thank you, sir, for the POI, but again, ignorance is definitely an art mastered by my opponents because the government itself is giving ration schemes. Let us take a brilliant example of the ration scheme run commendably by the government in this very own country. Let's imagine a crisis scenario when the starving throats of the public will be slaughtered under the guillotines of these profit-chasing enterprises, and we will have a starving majority and not a welfare state. This is clearly what you're against, and you very well contradicted your entire stance by this. Ladies and gentlemen, from ration schemes to courts, to telecommunication, to hospital service, ladies and gentlemen, the glaring example of hospital service. Let us look around us. Now hospital chains look like hotel chains, and the customer and the public as mere sacrificing goods, as mere profit looting mechanisms for them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not what we stand for. The chief whip came up to on the podium claiming willfully as how he is actually promoting welfare, as ironic as it sounds, giving public services to ownership to private companies. I like to remind you, as I mentioned already in my POI, that to expand a sector which is the need of the hour for the development of our country, to actually take our country from a developing country to a developed country, ladies and gentlemen, that control can only be in the hands of the government, which have regulating policies and regulations which can actually uplift sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, the point of contention of the debate today is to have a greater tomorrow, a welfare state, and this surely cannot be done by fake superheroes, which side opposition here claims to be, which definitely isn't blood-sucking and profit leeches called the private enterprises, but the elected governments that we elect, but elected and trusted governments for the people, of the people, and by the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anushri. Now that all three speakers for both sides have presented their arguments, I will request the Prime Minister of Side Proposition, Parth Jindal, turn to the podium and sum up the stance of his team. At that point, he can also refute some of the arguments put forth by side opposition. Needless to say, now no POIs are to be put. So, Parth, I request you to come to the podium. You're getting 3 minutes of your stance.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Dear side opposition, we agree with this point of contention, but what we do not agree with is that you have not provided any solutions whatsoever in today's debate. Today, a debate, be it whatsoever, has to result into some solutions, and today your side has provided none. And let me prove to you how. Today, first of all, they call these private companies as profit-sucking leeches. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'll explain to you throughout my first minute how these profit-sucking leeches are actually helping the public services. Let's talk about basic demand and supply. Today, all these private companies we know want to increase their profit. How do you increase your profit? One day is to increase your customer base. Now, how do you increase your customer base? By increasing customer satisfaction, right? And today, ladies and gentlemen, if according to you, these companies are raising prices, what happens? If prices rise, demand falls, right? To today, how will customer satisfaction, customer base increase if these prices rise? And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, these private companies are not fools. They know, they understand these basic principles of demand and supply. Lastly, let me talk about it, how they mentioned that 80 crore people are under the poverty line, and that's why when government provides with welfare, provides with all these basic amenities to these people, it's actually helping them. Yes, ma'am, it is actually, but it can be, same thing can be applied on our stand as well. Today, these private companies, we do not have to say that all the people, be it rich or poor, have to pay the same price for the amenities. Today, there are something called the corporate social responsibilities. All of that can be taken into account, and plus, we also mentioned that the government will be regulating, government will be accountable. So, these price ceilings, all the other things that we mentioned will still be into our picture. So, how is it that we are the worst side today? Today, the third speaker started by saying that she does not understand how we have won the debate and the topic has already fallen. Ma'am, let me explain to you. Today, our 3 speeches gave you 3 constructives. Even if you did not understand after that, let me re-explain them. Today we talked about how we'll be dividing work. We counted how profit maximization, or the incentive of profit maximization will actually help these public services. Lastly, we talked about how when we have these private companies who are who are running these public services, there'll be a better standard of living. We also catered to the point of pension, which the other side did not engage at all. Lastly, they mentioned that private companies lack integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, last time I checked, the government is not the epitome of integrity. Today, when we talk about corruption, the first thing that comes to our mind is the government. Today, let me talk about how you told that private companies will actually be leading our country to crisis. Let's take an example of our country. In 1991, we all know we faced a financial crisis. Who helped us through that? The private sector did, ma'am. The private sector helped us raise. They were the ones who uplifted our economy, ladies and gentlemen, not the government. Today, then they talk about that how manufacturing arms, first of all, that is not a public service, ma'am. Manufacturing arms is not a public service. You mentioned that they can be given to anybody. No, ma'am, they cannot be. Lastly, let me conclude by just stating that all the points that we have mentioned, all the counters that we are given, we are not saying that we are the best side. We are not saying that we are ideal. What we are saying, just like they said, that we are the ones who are giving solutions. We are the ones who are actually catering to the motive, to the point of what a debate is. Whereas you are just playing the blame game. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Parth. Judges, please note Parth, 3 minutes 24 seconds. Some of his stance. I now request Aditya Semwal, leader of the opposition, to sum up arguments of his side.
Even the smallest of leaks, esteemed House members, is capable of sinking a ship. Sadly, in my opponent's case, the ship in question is just a poorly tied together raft with a gaping hole in the middle. Beginning with the refutations of their case, firstly, the side needs to get its facts in order, because as the Speaker just said that the Indian economy got out of the 1991 crisis with the help of the private sector. Well, sir, it was because of Dr. Manmohan Singh opening up the economy to globalization. That was how we got out of that crisis, and last I checked, the finance minister is a part of the government, so that is something we need to deal with. Secondly, esteemed House members, they talk about how these private companies, they need to do the work because they need to maintain this image in front of the public of them being accountable. Well, someone clearly hasn't reduced them to the concept of deception, where companies may put in the work, but behind the backs of the public, they might sell this information, they might sell intel to the highest bidder, because at the end of the day, this is what these private companies are driven by, that is the profit motive. And that again is what they tend to justify. They say that price hikes, inflation aren't actually that bad for the public, and that rich or poor, not everyone has to pay the same price for things. Well, they're actually right. Because rich or poor, not everyone has to pay the same price for things, and the poor have to pay a much higher price for things, because these price hikes that take place, these will lead to wage cuts for the workers, wage cuts for those laborers whose entire living, whose entire wage determines whether they will eat at night or not. That precisely, esteemed House members, represent a vast majority of the country's population, and that precisely is the section that the proposition today seeks to exploit when it hands the entire public sector of the country into the hands of the private. Because they seek to build these ivory towers in our country, not realizing that our country is one that has a backbone of the rural sector, a backbone of people not belonging to these elite classes. And what happens is that these companies, they only serve the top class, they only serve the ones within the boundaries of these ivory towers, and that leaves the rest of the country to flounder. And that is what we cannot stand for today. Moreover, they make these blanket statements about how the government is corrupt, about how the government cannot exactly handle all of this. But the motion today, esteemed House members, does not talk about the government at all. It is simply about whether private companies are good enough to be given the entire public sector or not. And they clearly are not, which my side has clearly justified with its arguments about, firstly, the companies having a lack of integrity, secondly, the companies having a lack of accountability, thirdly, of how these companies have little to no regard for the public, and how they would trade their morals simply for some money. The refutal of these arguments by the proposition just shows that they are in favor of the public being relentlessly exploited by these companies, because they do not see the fact that these companies, they have a very myopic view of development. They may ensure progress for a day or two, but in the long term, when we need long-term inclusive progress for all citizens of the country, that cannot come with the private sector, that can only come with the public companies and responsible government, and that precisely is what we believe in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditya. That we come to the end of the first session or first phase of this final round. So, very well done, St. George's College and St. George's Academy. That was very keenly contested. I request you to take your places with the audience now, and after you have done so, I invite the speakers of Tyndale Disco School and Oasis School to take their places on stage. Thank you so much. Tyndale Disco School is being represented by Mustaqim Afik, Ayan Sabir, Atib Ijtaba, who will be representing side proposition. The topic, as I announced earlier, remains the same. This house believes that public services are best run by private companies. The Oasis School representing side opposition has the following speakers: Rana Kapoor, Yuri Rawat, and Anshika. So the rules remain the same. Before we begin, Tyndale Disco and the Oasis School, any doubts, any questions? Right, so ready to begin then. And so may I remind you that we will ring one bell. The first minute comes to an end. That is your cue. Both I. Do not think fast and do not ask a question. Your opponent will get an advantage. After that, we will ring a bell at 2.5 minutes to tell you that you need to wrap things up, and twice to tell you to wrap things up. So I now invite the Prime Minister of Side Proposition, Mustaqim Afik, to present his views.
With the permission of the chair. The irony is quite evident as we stand here at this gathering. We all receive education from a private institute, on an event hosted by a private institute, on a stage debating with each other why private institutions are not better at providing public services. Ladies and gentlemen, the members of the House and the Venerable Chair, a very good afternoon to all of you. Starting by defining the key terms for the motion that public services are best provided by the private companies, first of all, we need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, what public service actually refers to. It is a business of supplying or providing a commodity to all the members or some of the members of a particular society. On the other hand, what private companies refer to, or the private sector, is a part of the national economy, not under the direct command of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, the onus is on the proposition to make you realize how public services are better provided by the private companies. And the privatization of the public services is the need of the hour, and that is what the proposition is actually standing for. The Deputy Prime Minister would be further enforcing the stand by saying how it is more efficient to have a transfer from the public service. I'll take that in a minute. How is it necessary to have a transfer from the public sector to the private sector? While the third speaker will highlight more about the private sector while deconstructing the arguments of the opposition. Coming to my arguments, I will prove to you in 2 points why we should transfer the public services to the private sector. The first one being.
So don't you think privatization would lead to the exploitation of the poor laborers and make the rich richer and the poor even poorer?
Ma'am, that would be better answered by my second speaker. As I said, it's about the efficiency of the private sector that you'll be dealing with. Coming on to my first constructive, that is, whenever the public services are transferred to these private companies, this results in a more profit incentivized approach. Now you might think that it's quite vague why I'm supporting profits. Well, when we transfer this public service to the private company, it eliminates all the bureaucracy and the intermediaries in between these services, and therefore it makes the service more approachable and more easily available to all the masses, and that's what we actually want. The second thing I want to put forward in front of you is the feasibility that increases because of the privatization. It makes it more flexible because they have deadlines and they know how to meet them. In order to meet their deadlines, they change their strategies and they employ the best possible methods so as to provide the service in the best possible way. While the private companies try to uphold and preserve the value of contract, they will engage in competition, and that competition will be healthy, resulting in the creation of a better valued service. At large, what we can deduce from the proposition stands is that public services are provided in a better manner, because if that isn't true, why is India moving towards privatization? You can take the examples of VSNL, the Hindustan Zinc Limited of Balco. Ladies and gentlemen, the age is of efficient and swift investments and returns, and as soon as we understand, the better it would be. With that, I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Mr. P. I now request Tarana Kapoor, the leader of the opposition, present her arguments.
With the prior permission of the chair. Good afternoon to the House at large. The motion on fire today is this House believes public services are best run by private companies, and I, as the leader of opposition, stand firmly against it. What is a public service? Let me clear this out at the outset so I don't get any questions pertaining to it. A public service is any service intended to address the specific needs pertaining to the aggregate members of a community. The very essence of a public service, by definition, is that it's available to all members of a society so that each person is able to avail the benefits they offer. Transferring the ownership of these government-owned assets to private individuals would inevitably cancel out any and all advantages they currently offer. The private sector is notorious for running on a profit motive. This means that any business endeavors they undertake are never driven by social welfare and always with the blind desire to earn money. As a result, in the name of public services, these private companies will misallocate resources to tend to luxury crowds, and the already scarce resources of our country will be used to cater to prestige societies and form a society with ulterior motives that feed off of income disparities to only cater to the rich and wealthy.
Would you be taking a POI at the moment?
Oh, sure. I'm really sorry, but I cannot hear you very well.
So as you mentioned that profit is the only motive of the private companies, but what I mentioned in my speech was that private companies, although focused on profit, they eliminate various other things like the bureaucracy. How would you justify that?
Thank you for your question. Alright, so to pick up the point of bureaucracy, I was coming to it a little later, but no harm done. It's important to know that the profit motive is not one that you can just turn a blind eye to, because the second these companies, in the name of public services, stop looking at social welfare, what even is the point anymore? And furthermore, these public services cannot be run by private companies simply by saying that the elimination of bureaucracy cancels out the profit motive. My second speaker will be able to elaborate on this a little further, but I hope I've given you a basis of argument. If public services were to be privatized, the owners would focus solely on developing low-priority industries, which leads to undesirable waste as well as a rise in elitist consumption patterns. And once these industries are established, the ownership patterns will lead to monopolization, which inevitably entails exploitation of consumers, producers, and consumers alike. Doesn't this defeat the very purpose of a public service? Public services being owned by the private sector is disadvantageous not only from the viewpoint of consumption but also from the viewpoint of production. Public sector staff on average work 9 years less than those in the private sector and still get 30% higher wages throughout their lifetime. In a public sector, when it comes to benefits, pensions are 14% higher as compared to the comparable private sector industries. In a time of widespread unemployment, the public sector guarantees its workers job security, and I'm so glad my fellow opponent brought up VSNL because, ladies and gentlemen, when VSNL was privatized and taken over, within the first week of the takeover, 1,900 people lost their jobs in 1 week. The disadvantages of private companies getting ownership of public services heavily outweigh any possible advantages. The transfer of ownership is simply not a risk we can take if we wish to live in a community where the needs of people are put on the pedestal regardless of their wealth, beliefs, castes, religions, so on and so forth. The public sector is the entity that takes on large-scale investments with low gestation periods, which just goes to say that if people are to be tended to in an equitable manner, it cannot be done in the hands of the private sector. With this, I rest my case.
Thank you, Tarana. Tarana took 3 minutes and seconds. I now request the Deputy Prime Minister of Side Proposition, Dayan Sabir, for his arguments.
Greetings and salutations to one and all. As the Prime Minister already said, I'm here to strengthen and enforce our arguments, the proposition's arguments, even further. Now, I'll start by saying this. Our arguments basically lie upon the efficiency and working ability of the private sectors, which are far, far better than the government sectors, the public sectors. Now, the first, working efficiency and working ability. In private sectors, what happens is you have no job security. You have more vulnerability, resulting in more efficiency and more hard work due to the pressure on you. While as in government sectors, what happens is you have that job security, you have that satisfaction. You don't feel the need to work, resulting in less pressure on you, thus decreased efficiency with time. And the skilled workforce that the private sectors have are far better, far over the government sectors. For example, let's take Reliance Industries, which has 2,36,000 employees coming from all kinds of socio-economic backgrounds. If that's not the best, I don't know what is. Now, the private sectors, they continuously look for best top-of-the-chart workers that can elevate the company and betterment of the people. They elaborate their workforce and the skill. And yes, ma'am.
So you stated that the job insecurity motivates them to work, but eventually companies will run out if you're just going to work on the basis of job insecurities and hope that it motivates employees. What do you think of this?
Thank you for your PI, but I also mentioned that Reliance, a private company, also had 236,000 jobs from every socio-economic background. So while they are insecure, but the private companies do provide job opportunities for the lower classes. It generates job opportunities. I hope that answers your PI. Now, moving further along, the flexibility of the private sectors, they complete the deadline easier than the government sectors. They always uphold the contracts they are meant to, just because of their long-term standings. They have to have long-term standing for them to continue living in the market. Now, moving on, the oppositions might argue that there is expensive. The private sectors are expensive rather than the government sectors, which provides free education, free healthcare. But let me tell you this. The private companies, they provide far, far better healthcare. That is why you prefer going to a private hospital than a government hospital. They provide far better care. So yes, it is going to be a tad bit more expensive. Now, the people looking for free, the people that are more financially challenged, there are a number of volunteer centers in India. There is Salam Balak Trust, Seva Mandir, Volunteer Ladakh, Sadhana Forest, Human Wave, Helpage India, Robin Hood Army, CRY, just to name a few. And these volunteer centers will provide far better service than any government sectors just because they want to, and not that they're obligated to. Moving on, another argument is corruption. there's a lot of corruption in the private sectors. Well, the CBI has logged in more than 2,000 cases of corruption against 3,000 public and civil workers. In just 5 years, that is the peak of corruption. In just 5 years, there was 3,000 cases. 2,000 cases against 3,000 public and civil workers. And in the private sector, what happens is the power is distributed in far less hands, so it's easier to track corruption. Thank you, I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Karan. I now request Mayuri Rawat, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, for her arguments.
A very good afternoon to one and all present here. The motion under fire today is that public services are best managed by the private sectors. And I, being the Deputy Prime Minister of the opposition, will be expressing my views against the motion. Socialism, when the last word is said, merely is a new economic and political system whereby men can get more prosperity and food to eat. The real purpose of socialism is precisely to overcome and advance beyond the predatory phase of human development. Taking you back to the year 1947, when India got its independence, we were in a state of dejection, delusion. We were confused about what we have to do. Nobody knew how the country would be able to function. So in response to that, independent India came with new planned economic development policies in a democratic federal polity. The night gave way to light, the darkness didn't last long, and the public sector came into existence. In view of this type of socio-economic setup, our visionary leaders planned an entire roadmap to make India better, to make it walk on the line of development, and make India a self-reliant economy. And the reasons why I'm saying so is first because it has really led to a reduction of relative poverty. Secondly, it has also provided free health facilities to millions of people residing in India.
POI, ma'am, please.
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned this thing about development. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned this thing about development. Don't you think that private sector companies, like the companies based in the private sector,
Could you please repeat your question? You're not audible.
Hello. All right. So you mentioned this thing about development by the public sector, right? So the question basically is, don't you think that the private sector is more developing, I mean far more developing than the public sector, and it has developed India over time more than the public sector has ever did, and boosted the economic growth of India? Thank you.
Well, that way, even public sectors have developed India quite a lot. If we take examples of companies like ONGC, Bharat Petroleum and all. And secondly, as an economy, we need welfare. And wealth is just a mere way of achieving it. So our major aim should be welfare and not wealth. And socialism, or rather public sector, provides us with that welfare which every country looks forward to. Getting back to the topic. The reason why I say that public sector is best is because it has led to reduction of relative poverty. It has provided free healthcare facilities. It has led in the diminishing marginal utility of income. The protection of employment is one of the most important things that the public sector has provided us with. And above everything, what matters the most, as I have already mentioned before, is welfare. We live in a democratic setup, and as per democracy, each citizen of the country must be bestowed upon equal rights. And my question here is to each one of you present here. Do you think privatization delivers equal rights to each and every citizen of India? No, it doesn't. In capitalism, there are high-class differentiations, higher rents, there are no welfare measures, unequal chances in life, and above all, the exploitation of workers. And that's the reason why the Farmers' Bill of 2020 did not get passed. The farmers protested against the government because they knew that if the government passes the Farms Law, the farmers will basically have to act like puppets in the hands of private owners, and they will be exploited to the core. Talking about railways. Railways is a sector which is entirely government owned and is one of the highly used transport system in India. It provides more than 20 million people with their day-to-day. It helps more than 20 million people every day because it is less exorbitant and can be afforded by a lot of people. Successful government sectors like Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum Corporation, SBI and ONGC are all examples of how the government sectors can be so helpful and beneficial for us all. And as I would again reiterate on the same point, as a nation what matters is welfare, and wealth is just a mere way or an end to achieve it. Welfare is provided to us only through the public sector. With this, I would like to rest my case.
Judges, please note that every 3 minutes 40 seconds. I now request the Chief Whip of Side Proposition, Atib Mujtaba, to sum up the stance of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, as my preceding speakers have already defined the key terms here and outlined the motion for you, I'll be strengthening their arguments and just trying to elucidate and further explain what they'll try to say. First of all, there's a lot of debate going on here about efficiency, as the opposition side here likes to talk about efficiency, that it will be efficient but it won't be affordable. Well, what will you prefer, an efficient hospital or a hospital where you will die? India Spend released an article saying that almost 3 lakh people last year died because they didn't have the good healthcare facility, not because they couldn't have the healthcare facility. The government hospitals you go to, they do not have the facilities the facilities you need. The facilities you need. They do not have the exact faculty you need. Moving on to the second argument, that is profitability. Well, private companies don't only focus on the profit thing here. The thing is, what the government does, when they get the profit here, they are not implying or they are not putting those resources in the new projects. Well, we would be having employment there. If the government was putting the resources and the economy in new projects, we would be having employment that would have been increased, but it is not so. Rather, what happens with the private companies is that private companies put that economy, put that profit, put those resources into betterment and development of not the society exactly, but themselves, that results in the development of the society. Moving on to the third argument, that is, actually I'd like to counter here an argument of the opposition here, that is, we can't take the risk. This is just a wall the opposition is trying to hide behind. The cherry-picked quotes, the cherry-picked companies and facts they have brought here, the logistics, statistics, whatever they have brought here, they're just trying to fight. They're just trying to hide behind those. The main thing is, they can't explain why public services are better than private services. Provided free healthcare, something like this, or socialism or capitalism. Well, if you want to debate about capitalism, let's talk about the free labor theory of Karl Marx. If it is about capitalism, you're deviating from the topic. We should defenestrate this thing about the capitalism, socialism, and all this. What we're debating is about private sector. How private sector can better, efficiently hold the public services. Leaving this stage, I'd like to tell you that we're here, as my preceding speaker just said, we're here in a private institution. A public service is being provided to you by a private institution. Would you like to go to a government school or a private school? Most surely a private school. Why? Because government schools don't have the facility and faculty and resources to provide you with the best you want to. If you're getting the best, you need to pay a little more. With that, I rest my case.
Thank you, Atib. The OAC school, I would like to point out they would not, you let go of an opportunity to ask you why. So please do think fast and don't let that opportunity go. I now request the Chief Whip of the OAC school, Anshulika Gupta, to express her views.
Good
afternoon, everyone. With the prior permission of Madam Chair, I would like to begin my debate. A public service is a service intended to address specific needs pertaining to the aggregate members of the community. That means it is meant to be available to all people, irrespective of their caste, creed, gender, income, social stature, etc. The opposition here mentioned that private hospitals have better healthcare. Well, let me tell you, approximately 269.3 million people in India are still living below the poverty line. And do you think they can afford the exorbitant amount of fees that private hospitals charge for their treatment? Let me tell you that in the COVID-19 period, the past 2 years, the major brunt of the patients was borne by public hospitals because the private hospitals were not affordable. Disease doesn't choose income or social stature. It can happen to anyone. So how do we say that public sector
Excuse me, ma'am, there's a POI.
Just please give me a minute.
All right.
How do we say that public sector healthcare should be given to private enterprises? I'll take a point of information now.
Okay, so you mentioned this thing about people being below the poverty line and something like this. Well, they're still gonna die because they're not gonna get the facility they need. As I mentioned in my speech, there was an article published by India Spring that said more people are dying because bad health care is there rather than of lack of care. So more people are still gonna die. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think letting people die is the solution here, to be honest. What we need to do is increase healthcare in public sector, not just give them to these money leeches that is the private sector. Let's talk about public sector enterprises are more transparent. The opposition here mentioned about corruption in the public sector. Let me tell you this. This is a report of the Reserve Bank of India. This says that private banks witnessed more fraud cases as released in 2021 to 2022. Out of the total banking frauds, 58.6% were reported by private banks. I'm sorry. What corruption? I agree there is corruption, but this is worse. What we are talking about here is which is better. There may be problems in both, but public sector will always be better because people living below the poverty line cannot afford a 30 rupee Bisleri bottle just to drink water. Other than affordable services, public sector enterprises provide employment. Indian Railway is the world's 8th largest employer. A majority of the top 15 listed private sector utilities by market capitalism continue to witness a shrinking headcount in the financial year 2021-2022. This was seen from banking to manufacturing to energy to minerals. What are the benefits of private sector? Public sector is ruled by the government, it is driven by the government, which has the power to make substantial changes in the society itself. It has the power to change policies which directly drives industrial development. Now, the private sector is more inclined towards providing services to who can afford them than the needy. The US privatized health system costs double what we pay for ours. So I question you again. Do we really need to give these public sector enterprises to the private sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. I now request the Prime Minister of Site Proposition, Mustaqim Afek, turn to the podium and present a comprehensive overview of Site's arguments. And Site Opposition, you cannot put in blue eyes now.
With the permission of the chair. We have reached the end of the debate and we still don't know. Is public service provided by a private company worth it or not? The opposition's motives today just for finding ways to cancel out each and every benefit that we pointed out to them. They want to cancel out the bureaucracy. They want to cancel out it by saying that profits are much higher. Well, let me tell you that the cost savings, according to 100 odd studies performed by different universities, is showing that there's a 20 to 40% cost reduction when private companies are holding a particular service. How will the opposition actually try to understand and put forward an argument against this when there is a concrete evidence in front of them? Nextly, ladies and gentlemen, about cancelling out and monopolies, that's just over. Moving on, the private sector does not allow us to meet the so-called welfare is what the opposition today said. But do you think the employment that is provided by the private sector, like the teachers who work in the private sector, healthcare workers, even the third-class employees that we call, if they are working in the private sector and are getting handsome money and handsome salaries, you can't deny that their education is, that their employment is for the sake of profit gaining and all that. Furthermore, the employment, as my preceding speakers also said about the reliance, we have all others like Kotak Mahindra, we have the Tata Steels. They are paying taxes and helping the government of India to prevent and to progress more in the public sector. As they say, the public sector is not underdeveloped. But yeah, what we come to know at the end of the debate is a more holistic approach needs to be taken when finding the demerits and merits of a particular thing. We can't see it through a black and white prism. You can see only black and white from that. When you open your eyes and see what private sector is actually doing, then you can realize public sector, although it may be good, although it may be affordable, but private sector at the same time is also providing benefits that you cannot reject and you cannot disregard. And that would be a mere deception to the esteemed members of the House by saying that private sector would allow benefit in every way for us. Why are we turning a blind eye to all the motions that the proposition proposed today? With that, I rest my case. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. P. I now request Farana Kapoor, Leader of the Opposition, to sum up the arguments of her side.
With the prior permission of the chair. I return here now having heard the entire debate, and I honestly think it is ironic that side proposition should mention cancelling out of any valid points, because that's all they've been doing the duration of this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, I could not agree more with the fact that you cannot look at this as a black and white situation, as it is made up of shades of grey. And to this, I would like to say, my opponents firstly pointed out that the private sector is fast growing and largely contributes to the development of our country, and to this I say, when the government is allowed to work in its ways and the government is allowed control of what should be public assets, the national goals they formulate focus on economic development as well as social welfare. So we're not saying trash the economy for social welfare, nowhere close. In fact, when investments are large, when they have long gestation periods and low returns, it's not the private companies that make them. And usually these investments are in railway and telecommunication, which constitute the core infrastructure of any country. How do we develop economically without this core infrastructure? Now I would like to move on to another constructive, the side proposition mentioned, which is that when services are offered by private companies, they're more expensive but higher in quality. And to this I say, sometimes when it comes to services such as healthcare, for example, sometimes the bare minimum is all you need. And if that is too expensive to be in reach, then are we not failing as a society? Look at COVID-19, as the Chief Whip correctly pointed out. You lost jobs in COVID-19. Employment was at an all-time low and the need for hospitals at an all-time high. Now, ladies and gentlemen, imagine there are only private hospitals in this scenario. People losing jobs and then needing medical attention in a private hospital, they don't go hand in hand. When India dealt with COVID, it was the government giving out its free vaccinations, was it not? People lost jobs, people didn't have incomes, people could still get vaccinated. We have vaccinated multiple populations of some of the largest countries in the world, and yet side proposition claims that the government is simply not adequate in these fields. Furthermore, side proposition pointed out that bad healthcare causes more deaths than no healthcare at all. And to this I ask, side proposition, did you not yourself say that we turn to private institutions for our education? Now imagine if resources were turned to these public institutions for education, Where would that leave us? Is it possible that a betterment in education could prevent this altogether? Also, democracy. Let's talk about India. Democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. The government has to have a part in this. It cannot be private sectors just working on their arbitrary whims of negation of social welfare to earn profits, so on and so forth. If a democracy is to prevail, the government has to be allowed to work once the people have spoken. So, in conclusion, I'm sorry, but running public services through the private sector is simply not the way to establish a stable economy or a stable society. With this, I rest my case, but not my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Karana. And with this, we come to the end of the final round of the TW for this debate. And if I may, as chairperson, I would like to tell all 4 schools, Pelvisco, the Oasis schools, St. Joseph's Academy, St. George's College, regardless of who wins this debate, all of you were simply marvelous. As a chairperson, it was an honor to listen to you all. It was deeply humbling because I couldn't help wondering, where do you get your confidence from? How do you know so much? How do you have the presence of mind to stop yourself while you're speaking in full flow and take a POI and get back to regain your chain of thought? It's not easy. It's a very challenging form of debating, and truly you were absolutely marvelous. And also I think you've given me a great complex, because if I were to be asked to do what you did today, I would probably look for the nearest exit and run away as fast as my aging legs could carry me. Honestly, I could not do it. And even more difficult than what the speakers did today, I think, is the job of our respected judges. Listening to every speaker, giving your undivided attention cannot have been easy for you. So we truly, truly appreciate the time and the attention that you gave today, Mr. Gupta, Reverend Cornelius and Ma'am Cornelius. And as a small token of our love, appreciation and gratitude, I would request Himanshi, our girls' school captain, kindly hand out a small token of appreciation to each one of our judges. Thank you, Himanshi, and thank you, audience. If I may, audience, I would request you to give a very big round of applause for all our speakers. Thank you so much, audience. And speakers, we will keep you in suspense for a little while the tabulation is done. So I request all participants to please join the audience. Thank you so much. And thank you, Leah. You've been an excellent timekeeper.
gentlemen, for your patience. It's time for the results. Starting with the Cynthia Burrell Inter-School English Poetry Recitation, the promising performance. Oh, sorry. I would like to invite Mr. Vishal Gupta to give out these prizes. Sir. Starting with the promising performance, Samaira Ahuja of Hopetown Girls School. Second runner-up, Samara Footsong of the Oasis. Runner-up, Riddhi Lunthi, St. Jude's School. First position, Panna Jatroha, St. Joseph's Academy. And the winner of the Cynthia Burrell Inter-School English Poetry Recitation, St. Joseph's Academy. Thank you, sir. I now request Dr. S. Gerola to give out the prizes for the S.N. Sharma Inter-School Hindi Poetry Recitation and the HG Meeting Hindi Debate. The S.N. Sharma Inter-School Hindi Poetry Recitation, promising performance, Krishna Nand, Oak Grove School, and Cadet Vedant Rai, RIMC. Second runner-up, Aryan Mittal, St. George's College. Runner-up, Vaishnavi Gupta, St. Joseph's Academy. competition, Bhavya Soni Shriram Centennial. And the winner also Shriram Centennial. Edgy Making Inter-School Hindi Debate, Promising Performance, Cadet Aditya Kumar RAMC and Brinda Kamboj St. Jude's. Second runner-up, Shreyal Patnaik, St. Joseph's Academy. Runner-up, Cadet Yagna Pathak, RIMC. The best rebuttal and best speaker both go to Vinimesh Vairagi of St. Joseph's Academy. And the winners for the Edgy Making Inter-School Hindi Debate, St. Joseph's Academy. Thank you, sir. I now invite Mrs. Cornelius to give out the prizes for the spelling bee. In the sub-junior division, the promising performance, Kamaira Rawat, OSS. First position, Manan Gulani, Sriram Centennial. Prakash, Oasis. Intermediate division, promising performance, RM and Bhatia, St. Joseph's Academy. First position, Sahima Singh, Oasis. Senior division, promising performance, Naman Roy, St. George's College. First position, Cadet Varun Kathiresan, RIMC. And the winner of the Reverend Biggs Inter-School Spelling Bee, St. Joseph's Academy. Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Pastor Cornelius to give out the remaining prizes. Starting with the GD Living Inter-School English Debate, promising performance, Mehak Arora Asian School, Ghayur Arif, Tindale Bisco. Second runner-up, Aisha Faisal, Mallinson School. Runner-up, Anusha Barka, Mallinson. winner for the GD Lehman Inter-School English Debate, St. Joseph's Academy. Moving on to the T.W. Phillips Inter-School English Debate. Promising performance, Aditya Sembal, St. Joseph's Academy, Mott Shen, St. George's College. Second runner-up, Mayuri Rawat, Oasis. Runner-up, Tarana Kapoor, Oasis. Best rebuttal, Atib Mujtaba, Tyndale Whisper. Best speaker, Ira Gayatri Jha, St. Joseph's Academy. And the winners for the T.W. Phillips Inter-School English Debate, St. Joseph's Academy. Thank you, sir. I now call upon Mr. Vishal Gupta to give out the final trophy.
Well, good afternoon all. I have never even argued more than 2 cases in a day. Mr. Tyndale today made me judge 2 back-to-back English debate competitions. Well, it was an outstanding performance by all the participants. Amazing performance by the winners. A lot of positive attitude, also not so positive attitude, but that's a part of it. And I'm sure the people who couldn't win today, they will not be disheartened, but introspect that what has gone wrong. And of course, the people who have won, will be proud but not arrogant, and will move forward. All of you have worked very hard, practiced very hard, but the winners have practiced harder. And in that light, I'll only leave one sentence with you today afternoon, which is a kind of a life lesson which I have assimilated from various successes and failures which I have met. The lesson is hard, repetitive practice. Hard, repetitive practice with a clear strategy to achieve your goal. If you keep this lesson in your mind, keep this in your view, and go ahead in whatever you endeavor to do, I'm sure you all will be successful. Thank you all. Thank you, Wynberg-Allen.
Before the final result, I request one representative from each school to collect the certificates. Please come up on stage and collect the certificates. Now for the final results. The trophy of JUSTE 2022 goes to St. Joseph's Academy. I request only 2 participants of St. Joseph's Academy to come up and receive the trophy. Expression for the spectacular display of talent for this event would be totally stupendous. On behalf of the principal, staff and students of Wynberg-Allen, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to the heads of the participating schools, our judges, Pastor Cornelius, Mrs. Cornelius and Mr. Vishal Gupta. Your presence has been very encouraging, as has been the privilege of witnessing the amazing talent you possess. We bid you goodbye with the excitement of seeing you all again next year. Excelsior. I now request our principal, Mr. Tundel, to address the gathering. Sir.
Thankfully, this is not an address, just a reiteration of what Devyani has already done so well. Just another big thank you, that's all, and then everybody needs to go home. But let me thank all the judges again. There were actually quite a few of them, and some of them have left because of other appointments, but let me thank Dr. Sunita Rana, Mr. Shurveer Bhandari, Dr. Sudhir Garola, Reverend Lazarus Cornelius, Mrs. Sushma Cornelius, and Mr. Vishal Gupta, once again for giving their entire day and putting in so much effort into making this event a success. It's not easy to give an entire day to someone, and we are truly grateful for what they have done for us. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. Also, before we conclude, let me thank all the participating schools. All of you did wonderfully well. Please do go back and thank your principals, as always, for sending you over here, for brightening our day, for teaching us, for letting us learn together, for letting us see your talents and skills. We've loved hosting you, and like Divyani said, we would love to host you again next year and every time that there's an event in Wynberg-Allen. You are always welcome, and of course, we look forward to having you here. Thank you all so much. Very well done. Let me specially thank the two outstation schools. Thank you from coming all the way from Jammu. You did extremely well. It's been a pleasure to host you, and it's been lovely to have you on our campus and interact with you and have you, well, on campus with us. Thank you so much, and we hope that you take back fond memories of Wynberg-Allen and Mussoorie and do come again. So thank you all. Thank you Wynberg-Allen students for being a wonderful audience. A big thank you to Ms. McFarlane and all the staff who put in hard work. There's been a lot of hard work that went in behind the scenes. So thank you to each and every one of you, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you so much.